how you water and how you will control the climate will depend on conditions and what you're growing. So I would like to know what they are growing, if they're growing in a polyhouse or a glass house, and do they have equipment for measuring the climate and controlling the climate. Who are tomato growers? Paprika?
Almost.
And the rest? She's growing in the soil or in peat? Polyhouse, glass house? From the farmers, which farmers do have equipment to measure the climate? So measuring humidity, temperature, amount of light. So half, and the other half. So the other half are only controlling the climate by their feeling. And how do they control the amount of water they give? Okay.
For dripping and draining.
Yeah. But if you look at the amount of water, because that was also one of the questions of the farmers, how should we give water if the weather conditions are changing? Because if we look at the weather last week, you had some very dark days and some very light days. Because there's no difference between chrysanthemum, lilies, tomatoes or paprikas. For everything, the main reason for the water uptake is the transpiration. So 90% of the total amount of water that's being uptaken by the plant is being used for evaporation. And what is the main reason for the evaporation?
Because light.
Yeah. So light is the main reason for evaporation. Evaporation is the main reason for the water uptake. So therefore, as a grower, we could say, according to certain amount of light, we should give a certain amount of water. If you have a full-grown lily crop or full-grown chrysanthemum crop or tall paprika, they all have, with 100 joules of radiation, the evaporation is 200 cc per square meter. Yesterday there was about 1600 joules.
For this computer.
Yeah. So how much did then the tomato crop evaporate?
3,200
Yeah.
per square meter.
Because 1600 divided by 100, because for each 100 joules we have 200 cc, 3,600, because okay. And this is the same as 3.2 liters. So the first thing that growers have to do when there's more light, they have to give more water. So that is part of the answer to the question from what should we do if there's a sudden change of the weather. We should give water according to the weather circumstances. I was also in September in Korea. Then the difference between a dark day and a light day was only, that on the light day was only 25% compared to the light. On the dark day there was only 25% of the light compared to the light day. So also the amount of water should be only 25%. While a lot of growers we visit, every day the plants were giving the same amount of water. If you give too much water, so on the dark days, then the problem would be that if I look at the substrate gets very wet, and therefore I have a lack of oxygen, but also the crop gets more vegetative instead of generative, so it's also more difficult to start it flowering. Another problem is because of the high water amount, I got more risk for fungal diseases. So not only in the roots, but also my leaves, because if I give more water, I get big leaves, and therefore the surface is softer, so more vulnerable for mildew and botrytis. Anyone an idea what's the problem if I don't give enough water? So this is what we said, if you give too much water, what is the problem if you don't give enough water? Yeah, but okay, the turning of a leaf is something what I see, but it's not a problem. A problem is when I have problem with the health of my plants, or my production is getting less, or my quality is less. If it's just turning, then it's a symptom, but it's not really a problem. I don't going to pick less tomatoes or more tomatoes, but wilting again is a symptom, but again, when the leaf is wilting, the stomata in the leaves are closed, so they cannot uptake any CO2 anymore, so therefore the photosynthesis is blocked. So okay, wilting is a serious problem. Increase of the EC is not a problem on itself, but okay, that will cause a blossom anther. Blossom anther is a serious problem. But if the EC in your slab or in the soil for the lily and chrysanthemum growth is very high, what will happen then with the water uptake?
물 흡수가 잘 안 됩니까?
So, and what we see is that flowers, that the stretching of the stem is getting less, so they stay shorter. Okay, with chrysanthemums, you could say I'm going to wait longer before I'm getting a short day. That means the cultivation period gets long, so therefore a low production. If you look at the lilies, there should be, the longer they are, the more price do I get. So if they stay shorter because of the lack of the water and the high EC, I get less money. It's the same for the paprika and tomato. If I look at tomato, about 5% of the tomato is dry matter. So if I take all the water out of my tomato, then 5% is left over. What could happen if I don't give enough water, or the EC in my slab is too high, then instead of a dry matter of 5%, the dry matter can be 6%. It's almost correct, and does he know why? If this goes up by 20%, but the plant is not producing more sugars, because there's no reason for higher photosynthesis, so that means that if this goes up by 20%, this should go down by 20%, because the multiplication should be still the same. If I look at this one, the dry matter
종목에 또한 20%가 줄어들어야 되겠죠.
is 5 kilograms, so also in this case, the dry matter should be 5 kilograms. But now the 5 kilograms is not even to 6%, but not even to 5%, but even to 6%. So that means 1% is 6. 5 divided by 6 is 0.8 and 1.5. So 100%. So almost is the. So what we can see is that the amount of water that we give can have a big impact on the production, or with the blossom end rot that he mentioned, or the stem length of the flowers. It's difficult to tell with your eye, do I have 10% more light or 20%? Even you cannot see 10%. So you only can see the difference between a dark day or a light day, but not between 30% more light or 30% less light.
So just by feeling.
Yeah, but the feeling only works with extreme difference. If you look at the light sensors, we have two different kind of light sensors. Do they have any idea what kind of light sensors we have? What people are having a what sensor, what one having a look sensor? Yeah, but then all the other growers don't have any sensor at all. Okay, that makes it more complicated, because then you have to check the amount of drain. That also gives you an indication. But related to the question of the farmer, what should we do? If the weather is changing, then it's only possible if you have a light sensor. Otherwise, you only will find it when it's very dark or very late, or very bright. The watt sensors is giving me these joules, because a joule is 1 watt per second. So if I got the number of light during 1 hour, I have to multiply the radiations with the time period. So therefore this one is related with the watt sensor, and that's about the same as 25 kilolux hours. However, the lux sensor is more developed for what we see as human people, because our eye is more sensible red and blue, but we cannot see radiation heat. And the radiation heat is the main reason for the evaporation. So that's why if you look at new companies, they always will decide for what sensor. If you look at the old companies, they were working with a lux sensor, because the lux sensor is cheaper. And the watt sensor is also more stable. So if it's 5 years old or 10 years old, it's more accurate compared to a lux sensor. If you look at this one, this only mentions the transpiration. But we actually give more than this amount, because we also have drainage. Okay. If you don't have drainage, the EC in the soil or the slab will get too high. Yeah, okay, if it's a poly house with only one layer, the light transmission is the same compared to a glass. But if you look in Korea, most of them are with 2 layers.
So then this would not be light.
Yeah, okay, that will also influence the radiation, but the plastic will, well, the whole construction of this second greenhouse inside the other greenhouse, because most of the polyhouse is not 2 layers of plastic, but one polyhouse within another one, will reduce your amount of light about 30%. So that means this should be then 130 joules, because there's 30% less light getting into your greenhouse. But that would be the same, because light radiation here in Korea is quite strong, your temperature is quite strong. So what some growers are doing in the summer, they're using a screen, or they put a screen on top of the polyhouse, or what a lot of growers in Holland do, they put whitewash on top of the screen of the light. But all these 3 cases is the same like here. The light in the greenhouse will be less. So if people are using the screen quite often during the summer, then let's say normally I would give water for every 100 joule. I would start a water cycle. If I know that I use most of the time the screen in the summer, then instead of 100, this would may go up to 130. So I have to be aware what is the actual amount of light getting inside my greenhouse. So therefore you could use this rule for making your settings. That you said, well, I start watering 1 hour, 1.5 hour after sunrise till, depending if it's winter or summer, let's say 3 hours before sunset, and start watering every time I have 100 joules. If I see that my, then I can correct it and say, well, instead of 100 joules, I not start with 100 joules, but I start with 110 or 120 joules. And the simplest way to control the amount of drain is that you have one bucket where you put in a 1 dripper to see actually how much water you're giving, and the other one you collect all the drain water that's coming out of 1 slab. In this case, there are 4 drippers on 1 slab, and all the drain water is collected in this bucket. If this water level is the same as over here, then it means I have 25% of drain. And actually 25–30% is the amount of drain that I would like to have for tomato and paprikas. Tomato a little bit on the lower side, paprika is about 30%. Tomato about the 25%, paprika more like 30%, but if it's getting more into the spring and the summer, then also for tomato I would like to see 30%, because the climate conditions are quite strong here. And it was another question of one of the farmers from how can I steer the growth of my plant, or how can I steer the fruit setting? That also can be done with the drainage, because the lower the drainage is, the more generative your crop will be. Tomorrow we'll talk more about it, because there are more tools how we can steer our crop. If we look at the chrysanthemum and the lily grower, they're growing in the soil, or maybe some paprika growers are also growing in the soil, but then we cannot check the drainage. Giving water compared to the light, there's not really a fixed rule, because the soil can require a different amount of water. If I have a sandy soil, a lot of the water falls through. If you have a heavy clay soil, it will hold a lot of water. So therefore it's more difficult on the soil. So even with the sophisticated technology in Holland, still the growers of chrysanthemums that are still in the soil, because all the chrysanthemum growers are still in soil in Holland, they will check the soil on a regular basis to feel if it's moist enough, because there's no, well, there are some technical tools, but they're not really that reliable. So I take a sample out of the soil, and most of the roots are in the first 30 centimeters. So that's also where I need to take a sample. Yeah, but also lilies, also tomato, paprikas. The major amount of the roots are in the first 30 centimeters. So if I take the sample out of the drilling bore, then I should be able to make a bowl out of it. If it falls apart, then it's too dry. If I can make a bowl, but my hand is wet afterwards, then it's too wet. And I should do it before I give water, because if I do it after giving water, then of course it's too wet. So I should do it Yeah, because the sandy soil will,
Flying ways.
yeah, but also will be not so easy to grow on sandy soil, because sandy soil is not holding much water, so overwatering is not that easy at sandy soil. So okay, that's an advantage, but therefore it also not so much fertilizers, because also the most of the fertilizers are flushing through. So therefore you will not see so many growths that would grow on a sandy soil. But if you would be growing on sandy soil, then it's better to use organic manure, because the organic manure increases the capacity of holding water and fertilizers. And the other advantage for growing in the soil, but okay, there's also the disadvantage. If you look at growers in the soil, then maybe they are watering twice a week, or in the winter maybe only once. So that means there's a big capacity of the soil for buffering. So that also means if it's today dark or very light, there's still enough water in the soil. So I don't have to react quickly. For the substrate, if you look at the cocoa peat in Korea, it's about 18 liters per square meter. So the volume is much smaller. So therefore if I would not water the paprika for one day and it would be as sunny as today, then I would have a serious problem. So for the soil, a small mistake, so I give too much water or not enough water, it's not so big impact. On the substrate there's a big impact, but that is also the advantage, because in a substrate I can make it a little bit drier, a little bit wetter, I can influence the EC or the pH, and therefore in the substrate compared to a good soil, production is about 10-15% higher. Compared to a bad soil, the difference is of course bigger, but I can only get this 10-15% if I know what I'm doing, otherwise I even can get worse. So what you said before, it could be that I give too much water. And then look at the tomato plants, then instead of a round stem like this pen, I will get more a flat stem like this one. For all the other crops, like also the chrysanthemum, the lilies and the paprika, I will see light green spots on my leaves. And that's caused because of the root pressure. Water is being pumped up, but it's more water than the plant is actually uptaken and is able to evaporate. So therefore these cells are pushed, broken, and then I will have these light green spots on my leaf. What I said before, if I don't give enough water, the production will be lower. The stems will be shorter, what you said for the flowers, but okay, so also happen with the paprika and tomato, but that's not really a problem for these crops. Can you also think about an advantage of not giving enough water?
짭짤이.
Therefore the taste of the cherry tomato is better, or of the paprika, but also the shell life. So if I pick my paprika or tomato or even the flowers, they will last longer. So as a grower I have to find a balance. So I'm not losing production, but of course I also want that my consumers are still buying my tomatoes, because if the consumers are not buying my tomatoes because of the lack of taste, then I have a bigger problem. And also with what we mentioned before, if I keep them a little bit drier, the plant becomes also more generative. That's not an advantage for the lily or the chrysanthemum, but for fruit-bearing crops. Well, in general, what he said before, the stems, if I don't give enough water, the stems of the leaves will be shorter, and you can see there's hardly any green tissue, and you can easily see through the crop. So there's an indication that there was not enough water. If you look at these paprika plants, these are, much better. Which one received enough water, which one received not enough water? And what you see, because this one is hardly stretched, but also can see the color of this one is dark green compared to that one. And because it was kept dry, we can also see more roots, because roots are the only way for the plant to uptake water. So if water is the missing point, then the plant tries to uptake more water by just making more roots. Besides the color and the stretching, is there another difference between these two seedlings? And this plant is 18 days old, and this is actually 17 days old. This grower watered them before taking them away, and this block was not watered. So. But the question was the difference in the plant. Yeah. And what is causing the number of leaves?
The temperature.
temperature is causing how quick a plant is developed. So therefore, for a seedling, I would like to have a high temperature so it develops quickly. And that's what I want, because a plant can only have photosynthesis. Of course, the plant needs light, but if there are no leaves, then there's no purpose of having light. So the quicker the plant is making more leaves, the higher the photosynthesis level is, because if I have 3 times more leaves, then there's 3 times more photosynthesis. The other advantage is when the temperature is high, what you said, development rate is quicker, but therefore also the stem is rather soft, and we want to plant them upwards, so therefore if it's soft, we can bend it easily. This is what they said before, that if we don't give enough water, we could have wilting, but also because if the leaf is dried up, it will have sunburn, and that can be with even a few hours of lack of water. Especially when the young plants are just planted on the substrate, because they're not rooted in the substrate, so they only have the block to uptake the water, so that can only contain a small amount of water. In the nursery, the plants were planted close to each other, and now the plants are 2-3 plants only on 1 square meter. So now there's a lot of air passing through, so here the relative humidity is much lower compared to the nursery, and therefore again it's more difficult for the plant to cope with it. A lot of the growers are planting at the end of August, so then the radiation is very strong, temperature is very strong, so most of the growers will use a screen during transplanting, but also what some growers are doing, they put the block not directly on the substrate, but they have plastic below it to keep it elevated. But then of course it will be more difficult for the plant to uptake enough water. So I don't think there's a reason to use this kind of plastic for the plants, because the growing circumstances are already quite generative. Sorry. But of course, this is easy for the grower to test himself. So what they can do is to say, okay, 20 plants I don't use the plastic, or I do everything but I use it for 20%. Because if you look at Holland, then always the plants will be not planted on the block. And maybe that's related with this idea, but in Holland we are planting in the winter, with the amount of light is only 10% compared to the amount of light that they have over here, with a temperature that is 10 degrees lower compared to here. So therefore the climate circumstances of Holland are making the plant are very vegetative. So that's why we have to do it in Holland, but I don't think they have to do it. So if there's something simple, because I'm also consulting growers, if there's something simple that you can test, then as a farmer I would always test it, because your climate conditions can be different. The variety could play a big role. What the market wants can be different. The market in Korea wants a different kind of paprika than the paprika in Holland. So as a trainer, if I would look, it's with our grower in Holland would do, then it's completely wrong compared to Korea.
들고 하고 바로 정식을 해도 상관이 없다는
그런 말씀은 아니고요. 즐곡을 해가지고 저희가 35일 만에 이제 큐브에 또 키워가지고 35일 이후에 정식을 하지 않습니까? 정식을 하는데 수박 받침대 위에다가 올려둬가지고 수분 스트레스를 줘가지고 뿌리를 못 뽑게 만들어가지고 수분 스트레스를 줘서 생식생장을 완전 전환시킨 다음에 정식을 하는 농가들이 있고, 일부 농가 같은 경우에는 35일 이후에 정식을 바로 안 하고 배지 옆에 둬가지고 가정식을 또 일주일 정도 둬가지고 이제 본 슬라브 위에 올리는 그런 농가들이 있던데, 그렇게 이제 수분 스트레스 주실 필요가 없다는 거죠. 바로 그냥 35일료를 바로 그냥 정식을 해도 큰 문제가 없다는 겁니다, 우리나라에.
And that's also probably one of the main advantages for Dutch growers compared to Korea, but the growers everywhere outside of Holland, is that the Dutch growers, they don't look each other as competitors, because in the past they didn't sell their paprikas to the market but at the auction. And if you sell your product to the auction, you're not determining the price of your paprikas, but the people who are buying are determining the price. And therefore, if you would be a market system and you would sell your paprikas for 150, then he thinks, well, I also want to sell all my paprikas, so I'm going to ask 140. So therefore there's a more competition between farmers in Korea or in Australia or whatsoever. But since the farmers in Holland don't look at each other as competitors, all the farmers will form groups to change information with each other. And therefore they don't need to have to make a trial on their own greenhouse, but he said, but doing the plastic, but they will see, well, he will use it and his production in the first week was higher compared to the other one, or lower. So by sharing information with the farmers themselves, that's the most easy and cheapest way to learn. But maybe also the most difficult way to set up in Korea. Because you could say that's also the main reason of the knowledge for the consultant, because he visits maybe 30 paprika growers and he knows, well, he had a problem with that and that was caused by that. So he learns by his own clients. But you can also learn, of course, from yourself. But anyway.
So consultants also plays a very important role.
Yeah, but in Holland it's easier because all the greenhouses, they have equipment for climate control, for watering strategy. If I only have a very simple greenhouse, then there's not so much work for a consultant to do. So you cannot make a living out of it. And the greenhouses in Holland for paprikas are more than 2-3 hectares, so they're more like 5 hectares or 10 hectares. With the water we give, we also apply fertilizers and pH. And therefore we can influence the EC and pH as well when we give water. If we look at the fertilizers that we apply, then we use nitrogen, phosphate, potassium, calcium, sulfate, and magnesium. And in a much smaller amount, the iron, manganese, copper, zinc, boron, and molybdenum. However, if I'm growing in the soil, unless it is a sandy soil, then also the soil already contains a lot of minor elements. So there's only need to give iron and boron when I'm growing in the soil. All the other ones, I would not do it if I'm growing in the soil. In between, these are elements that are not really necessary for the plant, but they can give me an advantage. In the past, the growers were afraid of chlorine and sodium because if the level is too high, the production is less. But nowadays, especially with the cherry tomato growers, they use quite a lot of the chlorine fertilizers. It's making the taste of the cherry tomatoes better, and it's also making the plant more generative. Another thing is then it's making less susceptible for diseases. These are lettuce plants with giving all the fertilizers, and this is indication how high the level of the infection is. So a high color means that the plant's having a high infection level of a bacteria. What we see if we apply potassium chloride or calcium chloride, the infection level is lower compared to calcium sulfate or the control. And this was after infection. These are plants that are not infected, so therefore the level is lower over here. But what we can see is it's not making the plant resistant, but the susceptibility is lower. That's the same for us. If we eat healthy, we're not getting a cold, but it doesn't mean that we never can get a cold. It only makes a chance that we get a cold smaller. Yeah. And the scientific reason behind this is that they say the uptake of calcium is improved, and calcium is needed for making cell walls, so the cell wall is stronger, so therefore less penetration of the bacteria, the fungi. And the other one is that the uptake of nitrogen is being reduced, because usually if I use chlorine, then I'm going to put in something less. And that's so usually chlorine is replacing the nitrogen, and what we said before, if I apply a lot of nitrogen, soft leaves, and therefore more susceptible. So what I can do is replace 30 kilograms of the potassium nitrate with 20.5 potassium chloride, and that's to do that the molecular weight of this one is lower compared to that one. So therefore the total amount of potassium stays the same, but I have to use less kilograms.
So what do you mean? 22.5% of
25 kilograms.
Kilogram.
Yeah. So 30 kilograms of potassium nitrate is replaced by 22.5 kilograms of potassium chloride for tomatoes. Paprika is more sensitive for chloride, so there I replace 20 by 15 kilograms. How many growers are taking a sample of the drain water or from the soil?
Around 5.
5. Okay. How regular do they do it? Once a month, once a year, or
3 weeks interval.
3 weeks?
예,
측정을 말합니까?
예, 계획 분석.
분석은 분석 센터에 보내는 걸 말씀하시는
예, 예.
Okay. Well, so till now, I hardly didn't have so many growers who had it every 3 weeks. Usually, people never do it, or only maybe once a year.
잘하고 계신 겁니다.
But the problem is in Korea is that most growers are using groundwater. So the groundwater already contains fertilizers. Most growers are using coco peat. Do they have an idea what coco peat is doing with the fertilizers?
흡착을 해버립니까?
Yeah, what elements?
자리가 아닐까요?
If I have the coco peat, there's already quite a lot of potassium
자, 코코피트는 그
Sodium.
자체로 나트륨하고
and chloride inside.
칼륨하고
And now
염소하고 상당히 많이 함유를 하고 있습니다.
it will hold from my drip water. It will take the calcium, the iron, and the manganese. So it will hold these elements from the drip water and release these elements. So therefore, what I should apply in the beginning could be different compared, let's say, after 1 month or 2 months, because this one is exchanged, but at a certain point, there's no exchange anymore, because then the slab is buffered with the calcium and the iron, so then it's stable. So that means the fertilizer I would apply in the beginning would be different compared to 3 months later. Another reason is that we have to change the fertilizers, or could change the fertilizers, is that in the beginning there's no production because the plant has to grow, start flowering. So the production is increasing in the beginning every week. Does this influence the uptake of the fertilizers? So the amount of fruits on the plant, does it influence the amount of the uptake of the fertilizers? Gallium.
그 다음에 in, phosphate.
No.
이거는 미칩니다.
There's another reason, but some growers increase the phosphate, but that has more to do that we want to decrease the nitrogen level. And if we decrease the nitrogen, we have to compensate that with that. So therefore the decrease of the nitrogen could be the reason that we increase the sulfate or the phosphate.
phosphate uptake.
Yeah. So the increase of the phosphate has nothing to do that we really want to apply more phosphate, but more that we want to decrease the nitrogen level.
With increasing the potassium level.
Yeah. Can we go to the greenhouse to have them shown?
And then 10 minutes more, and after taking rest, and then we enter greenhouse.
Yeah.
What about my strategy?
Yeah. Okay.
한 2시 반까지 2시 20분에서 2시 반까지 강의를 하고요. 잠시 쉬셨다가 이제 잠도 오고 많이 졸리우실 건데 온실에 들어가시고 장문 한번 보면서 또 계속 진행을 할게요.
Now we come to the magnesium. So how can we see that this is magnesium deficiency? So I know it's an old leaf, but if I use the flow chart, how can I find out that this is caused by magnesium? If I look at the leaf, I can see is a certain pattern. It's not irregular. So that means now I have to look in, okay, we already said the pattern was regular, so now I have to see if it's in between the veins or near the edges. But if I look at the picture again, then actually around the leaf edge it's green, but the veins itself I can still see because they are nice green. So magnesium. So technical speaking, it should now be possible for yourself to use the flow chart by the time that you see a deficiency in a crop to find out what is causing it without having analyzed it. And a young planting could have problem with the mildew. And that has to do that if I look at the cell walls need calcium. But what they also said, if I plant on coco peat, the coco peat can absorb quite a lot of the calcium. So a deficiency of the calcium could lead to more problems with the powdery mildew. So therefore, before you have your first fruit on your plant, you could add 10% calcium nitrate extra to the fertilizers to make sure that the plant can uptake enough calcium. What we also could do is what we mentioned before. If I apply the calcium chloride, it will improve the uptake of the calcium. Oh, okay, that's what he said. Well, at least what I try to explain is that if I apply chlorine, it improves the uptake of the calcium, but it reduces the uptake of the nitrogen. And both, this uptake increase of this one will make stronger cell walls, and less nitrogen, of course, will also make 30 kilograms. If it's tomato, the 30 kilograms calcium nitrate by 22.5 kilograms potassium chloride for tomato. If it's paprika, 20 by 15 kilograms. And looking at amount, I think then he's also using a 1,000-liter tank, because 60 kilograms sounds for me not a normal amount. So he grows tomato. 20 kilograms. And that has to do that, but that has to do with all the elements. A certain level, it's good to apply something, but if you apply too much, then it can be a problem. And then with the chlorine, it would be that maybe the uptake of nitrogen becomes a problem. And especially for paprikas, well, it's more the other way around. Tomato is not that sensitive for chlorine, so therefore you can apply high levels. For all the other crops, we are not allowed to apply so much. And that's also what is shown over here, because we can, by this one, we can tell what is the problem inside the plants, but it could be related to another problem. And that's why we can use this. If I look here, what he said, a high level of manganese. Manganese can be occur in Korea because of the use of groundwater. But a high level of manganese reduces the uptake of iron. So if you have a straight line, that means one element is reducing the uptake of another element. So a straight line means there's a negative influence, and the way the arrow is pointing is which one is influencing which one. So if I look at phosphate, a high level of phosphate has a negative influence on the uptake of zinc, but a high level of zinc has no influence on the uptake of phosphate. In the past, a lot of the iron pipes that were used in the horticultural greenhouses, they were coated with zinc to prevent rust. But if you have a zinc-coated gutter, then the zinc is also coming in the water. So we had quite a lot of problems with iron deficiency in the past in Holland, not so much because we are not giving enough iron, but because of the high amount of zinc. Not only in the gutters, but also sometimes in the watering system too. If they had some iron pipes, and also sometimes inside the greenhouse they used iron. But they also could have a positive effect. So if you have a dotted line, that means, for instance, for potassium, potassium has a positive influence on the uptake of iron. That means I have to think first before I change my fertilizers. Is it either caused by the actual lack of, let's say, zinc, or maybe is my phosphate level too high because I applied too much monopotassium phosphate? Now I would like to discuss the individual fertilizers with some pictures to make it more clear. Nitrogen is the most important one because it's huge in huge amounts by the plants. It stimulates the vegetative growth, so that's important to have enough nitrogen in the beginning of the growth of the plant, in the seedling stage. But also what we said before, because the leaves are getting bigger, it makes the plants more susceptible for diseases, and we'll see the symptoms first in the old leaves. So what we said before, the whole leaf will be light yellow, so this is a tomato leaf with nitrogen deficiency, this is a normal tomato leaf. Does anyone have an idea what the problem is with a leaf like this? What is causing the green color of the leaf? The green color is caused by the chlorophyll. The chlorophyll is the place where the photosynthesis takes place. So if I have a light green leaf, then photosynthesis could be only 1/3 compared to a regular leaf. Well, the advantage is, because it's for nitrogen, we can see it on the old leaves, and already most of the photosynthesis takes part in the upper place. So therefore the effect is a little bit less. If we would have a sulfate deficiency, the light green leaves would be on top. So if I don't then only have 30% of my photosynthesis, I also will have only 30% of my production. But even for nitrogen, because it will start over here, but if I have a lack of nitrogen on long term, then also the young leaves at a certain point will have a lack of nitrogen. So if we have a nitrogen deficiency on a long term, eventually the whole plant can be light green. He was taking a drain analysis every 3 months. Are his figures rather stable, or is there a big difference between each time he takes the sample? Oh, small thing. So it's tomato. Okay, then what I said, I would expect, but because the higher the EC, then also the smaller the fluctuations are. Yeah, okay, that's I think for papaya quite high. Because if I want to explain the effect of EC, I would say, let's say if I EC over here of only 2.0 and EC over here of 4. I'm not used to work with ppm, so I just write a figure down, but I'm not sure if it's correct, but at least it may. Let's say I have calcium here 300 ppm, and here's a double amount. So if everything is a ratio, it should be 600 ppm. Suppose of the cocoa peat, or because of the amount of more vegetative growth of the plant, there's an increase of uptake by the plant by 50 ppms. But 50 ppm on 300 is only 1/6. 50 ppm here, because they're the same plants, is only 1/12. So therefore, the higher the EC is, the smaller the fluctuations are. So, okay, this does only, we have to be careful not to give a low EC, but okay, for the fruit-bearing crops, not like the chrysanthemum and the lilies, already people are using a high EC to make it more generative. But if you look at the flowers, people are not using high EC to make it generative. So there we saw a lot of growth trying to reduce the EC to save fertilizers, but then you can see much bigger changes in the drain values. The advantage of nitrogen deficiency, if I apply the right amount of nitrogen, the color is getting dark green again. If I would look at seedlings, or even cuttings of the chrysanthemums, the color in the beginning can be light green. And that has to do that because of the higher air temperature than the soil temperature, the development of the leaves is quicker than the development of the roots. So even if there's enough nitrogen available, the plant will look light green because of the speed of the development. Here we have young paprika plants. The leaves look light green. So again, deficiency of nitrogen, but it's actually not solved by putting more nitrogen in the A or the B tank, because the drip EC from the grower was much too low. It was only 1.5 or... And why will it not make then a difference if I put more nitrogen in the A and B tank? Why will that not solve this problem? Yeah, but okay. But sometimes some growers forget, because the amount of fertilizer sent away is controlled by the EC sensor. So if I just put in, and it's the same people also make with the pH, so if I put in more in the A and B tank, there's not going to be more in the drip water, because the EC is controlling how much fertilizer is taken out of it. So if this EC would, let's say, be 2 times higher, then the amount of fertilizer being used would be only be 50%. So therefore, if I concentrate this by 2 times, then the same amount would be the same. But it would be the same for the pH. Suppose my pH is too high, I will not change that by putting more acid in the A or the B tank, because this is then controlled by the pH sensor. So controlling pH is not influenced by the pH in the A and B tank. Phosphate, well, this is not so important for them. The only thing is that they have to remember that it plays an important role by the development of the roots. This is the irregular pattern what we said if you have phosphate deficiency, so it's irregular pattern. But there's also a big risk, there's also a risk of having too high levels. And this is more likely to happen, I would say, than this one. Because all the nutrients with phosphate, especially with calcium, they dissolve very difficultly. So if the phosphate level is high, there's a big risk of having precipitation with the calcium. And if the calcium participates with the phosphate, it could lead to a blockage of the drippers. And quite often I did tests with the growers where we just took bottles and to check 10 drippers to see how uniform the amount was. And quite often that some drippers were only giving 10% compared to what they should give. Especially with tomato and paprika, where you only have 2 or 3 drippers on one slab. That means if this one is getting only 10%, then all the plants are not getting enough water. What I mentioned before, in Holland, the light amount in the winter is very low. It's only a quarter to amount of light here in Korea. In the summer, in the spring, we have the same light levels, well, a little bit less, but quite comparable to here. So what happens in Holland is that in February, the light every week, or every 2-3 weeks, the light amount is getting doubled. So a lot of plants where we have the problem of the blockage are getting wilted in February, March, because before there was no need of much water, but as soon as the evaporation is high because of the high light, even with good growers, we see still a lot of wilting. So this is a quite serious problem, even for Dutch growers with 5 hectares or 10 hectares. Okay, one part is then looking at the amount of phosphate. If you look at phosphate efficiency, it also makes the plant smaller. So this one has the same amount of leaves and this one, but it's shorter because the distance between the leaves is smaller, and also the leaf cells are smaller compared to the one that's giving the normal amount of phosphate. Okay, what also could happen quite often is that if you look at the tomato leaf, you can see some discoloration over here. It's getting purple, but that can have 2 reasons. Either one is then the problem of the phosphate level. The phosphate level is too low, but the other one is that the temperature is too low, because this is a white rose, but we can see the discoloration over here, but also at the leaf, not because of lack of phosphate, but just by too low night temperatures. So if the discoloration occurs in your crop in the winter, then it's more likely to do with the low temperatures, because the night temperatures get that low in Korea and the energy prices are that high, that is then probably more related with the temperature than with the phosphate, because both of the color is caused by the same pigment. So yeah, so you cannot see an actual difference, so you only can think about, well, was it really cold the last few days, because this happens within a very short period, or did it actually change the amount of phosphate? But if you didn't have a problem with phosphate before, then pepper the same, normal plant, and the one with a lack of phosphate, so therefore the plant stays small. And probably because of the lack of the growth of the roots, also a lack of nitrogen. So the discoloration of the leaves is more to do with the lack of the roots because of the poor development. Small coffee break. So we continue with the fertilizers where we stopped yesterday. If you look at potassium, it plays an important role in the transportation of water in the plant. If you look at tomato, it influences the color of the fruits, and also for some flowers, pink, red flowers, it can also influence the color. It controls the opening and closure of the stomata, and when I have a deficiency, the stem becomes thin. When I have too much, the leaves and the stems are getting shorter. The color of the leaves is getting dark green, but it's more important, I get bigger problem with calcium and magnesium deficiency. So blossom end rot could be the cause because of too high levels of potassium. But if you look at the plants, there's more potassium in the fruits than in the leaves on the stem. And it's the same for the flowers. So that means if there are more paprikas on my plant, or more tomatoes, or more lily flowers, there's a high demand for potassium. So at the moment that we see there's a lot of fruits or a lot of flowers in my plant, I can increase the amount of potassium nitrate with 10%. If you look at the water transport inside the plant and the closure of the stomata, you have to understand a little bit of the function of the stomata. So this is a picture of the stomata. If I represent the stomata by a balloon, then you can see if I would put in more air in the stomata, it will get bigger, and therefore I will create an opening. So now water can evaporate and CO2 can go inside the leaf. That's the same what's happening in the leaf. At the moment light is coming on the leaf, potassium is transported to the stomata. If I would put salt around here and there's a lot of water in the air, where will the water go to? And that's also what is happening over here. Because of the higher level of potassium over here, the water from this cell will be transported to that cell. Therefore the volume will increase, but since this one is a fixed size, it cannot go stretch this way, so the only way it can stretch is by moving this way and that way, and therefore the opening gets bigger, water can evaporate, CO2 can evaporate. However, it could be that the evaporation of the water is stronger than the water uptake, so the plant is losing more water than it can uptake. Then the plant makes a hormone, and the hormone transports the potassium back to these cells. Again, water will follow the potassium, and now the stomata will close. So the potassium plays a role in the opening and closure of the stomata. So if I have a potassium deficiency, that could lead to wilting of the plant. What we also mentioned is that potassium plays a role in the color of the tomato. So these are the normal tomatoes, and these are tomatoes with a lack of potassium. So you can see they are more orange instead of the red color over here. This could be another case. So now we can see the orange stripes on the tomato. We also can see some discoloring, but now it's called by a virus. But now it's more dotted. So in the other one it's more bigger parts. If it's only very small parts, then it's caused by the virus. If you look at the leaf, which part of the leaf is having the highest transpiration? Because here the air is moving, so therefore we have more evaporation around this edge. So that also means if I have a deficiency of potassium and the stomata is not closing properly, this will have a bigger problem, and that's why we have the dead tissue caused by potassium deficiency, what we can see over here. And also what we see over here, the leaf starts curling because of the lack of the water, then it starts curling, and of course the curling is more severe at the edges compared to the middle. If you look at paprika, then a lack of potassium could also lead to a crack in the stem of the fruit. It looks similar to problems with fusarium. So in the beginning, growers thought it was a fusarium problem. But if we make a cross-section of the stem, with fusarium, all these vessels would be discolored. But now it's only discoloring at the edge. Again, discoloration at the edges. If it would be, let's say, only this part, then it would look like magnesium deficiency. But since it's starts from the edges and moves inside the leaf, therefore we can see it's potassium deficiency and not magnesium deficiency. Paprika, it also can lead to cracking of the fruit. It's because what we said before, fruits have a high demand of potassium. But quite often the cracking of the fruit is related with climate or with water. The cracks could be rather big or very small. If there are big cracks, they're caused because the fruit is not elastic enough, so when it's growing strongly, the skin will just burst. In the night, let's say the temperature is 17 degrees. During the day, let's say we want to have 25, but if we heat up too quickly, the fruit is still 17 degrees, but the air could be already 25 degrees. And what will happen if I have a cold object in warm air? What will happen with the object? But if I have condensation, it means this part stays very cold because of the water evaporates, and therefore this part is growing less fastly compared to the other ones. So therefore it could crack. But it also could be the other way around, that you have a fruit and the sun is shining directly on the fruit. This one gets warmer as the other one. Okay. So both cases could lead to the big cracks. So these two are related with the temperature, but it also could be related with the water uptake. If I get a lot of water, but the evaporation is not high, the plant will uptake a lot of water, and then also the cell walls may crack. So if I have big cracks, I have to look at, is the sun not shining directly on the fruit, or do I have condensation in the morning, or maybe do I give too much water or a too low EC. Yesterday we mentioned that it's easy to make some kind of construction to measure the drain. So if I would collect the drain water of one slab, I don't want to see any drain in the first drip cycle. I don't want to see any drain in the second drip cycle. In the summer, at the third drip cycle, I would like to see some drain. In the winter, on cloudy days, maybe only at the fourth drip cycle. So if it's already on the first or on the second one, it's more likely to have these cracks in the fruit. These are more or less caused by the same problems as with the big cracks. So the fruit is growing too quickly, so that could be a lead because if let's say before I have a lot of tomatoes on my plant, but then I'm taking off all the old ones, more water can go to the fruits that are left over. So then these will suddenly grow quicker and therefore they can burst. That would be the same if I, before all the time, let's say the temperature was 20 degrees, but now suddenly several days the temperature is only 18 degrees. Therefore also the water uptake will be strong because the evaporation will be less. Or what we mentioned yesterday, if I give all the days the same amount of water, even if it's a dark day or a sunny day, then on the dark days I would give too much water and it also could lead to these cracks. If we look at the climate, then I would like to see something like this, so rather stable. If the climate temperature goes like this, then I'm also more sensitive for problems. If I don't have a climate computer, it's difficult to control the temperature because then I have to open the windows manually, close them. But if I have a climate computer, it's easier to reduce the fluctuations. Also when I have high radiation levels, then also the temperature of the fruit could increase more. So using the screen in the summer is also preventing the problems. If my average temperature is too low, then I also will have more problems because what you said with the average temperature, then I will get bigger fruits. But the bigger the fruit is, the more likely I will have cracks because there's more pressure from the inside with bigger fruit. If this is sunrise, but okay, then normally our night temperature is low compared to our day temperature. If I wait too long for heating up, so I wait till sunrise, what is quite, or at least was quite common in Korea, then maybe I do like this. But if the sun is coming through, the sun is heating up my greenhouse, so the heating up of the greenhouse comes very quickly, so there my fruit is still cold, so there's a bigger risk of condensation. If I would heat up before sunrise, the risk of condensation is minimized. For cherry tomatoes, I should heat up with a speed of 45 minutes per degree. But the bigger the fruit, the longer it takes to heat it up. So for paprika or round tomatoes, I have to look into 1 hour per degree. Just like the nitrogen and sulfate is used for the chlorophyll, so that's the reason that if you have a deficiency of chlorophyll, we have these light green spots in the leaf. What we mentioned yesterday, a small deficiency of magnesium is only a good sign because then we know that there are a lot of fruits on a tomato plant. Of course, it also can be more severe, then the whole plant will be showing deficiency, and then of course we have a serious problem. But then you must be a really bad grower because what I said, it started over here. So this was taking place at least 1 or 2 months and the grower didn't take any action. So paprika, it looks, can look like what you said yesterday, the light green spots, but sometimes with some varieties and all can look like from the edges it's going downwards. Well, that would lead to all the deficiency. If I would see some kind of a deficiency, and I think it's caused by the magnesium deficiency or nitrogen, I would increase the amount of fertilizers that apply that kind of fertilizer by 10%. If I would increase it more, then maybe I cause another problem. So therefore, if I make changes, the changes should be limited, not changes of 25 or 30%, because then maybe I create another problem. That's the same what we mentioned yesterday. If I have some drain water analysis, it would be the same. If I think the levels in my drain water are too high or too low, then I also would avoid big changes, because then maybe the next time it's too low when it was now too high. So I only make changes about 10%, or the deviation should be extreme, that may be a little bit more. That's the same if you're driving in your car and you see that the speed is too high, you only reduce the gas a little bit, not really a big amount, because then the car goes like this and it's very difficult to drive. But you only give only a little bit more gas or a little bit less. That's the best way to control the speed of your car. That's the same with the plant, with the fertilizers. If I make big changes, then also the fertilizers in my crop goes like this, and there's no optimum level anymore. Calcium, well, only transported by the xylem, and that means that it's only transported when there's transpiration. Also, it's only uptaken by the young root tips. So I have to have a good development of the roots. For the lily, the tip burn of the bud. And the reason is that all the leaves are evaporating, but the fruit and the flowers are not evaporating. So that's the reason that if we have a calcium deficiency, we would either see it at the flowers or at the fruit. If the transpiration is very low, there's hardly any water being pumped up by the roots to the leaves. But it also means during the night, because in the night there's no transpiration, but if the roots were not active during the day, then there's also no water being pumped up anymore. And that's the way we get calcium in our flowers and our fruits. Only during the night, when the water is still being pumped up, because then there's no transpiration, so then the same amount goes to the leaves as to the flowers and to the fruit. But if there's hardly any transpiration during the day, there's hardly any pressure by the roots, so therefore there's also a lack of calcium in the flowers or in the fruit. So it also could be possible to try to stimulate the evaporation during the day. That could be by
fanning and
and also making a small opening in the windows, because what a lot of growers do, like here, because talking in the winter. Another thing could be if the EC is very high, then also the uptake of calcium is being reduced. So you could also look at if EC in the drain is not too high. Also the amount of ammonia is reducing the uptake of the calcium. So I could reduce as well the amount of ammonia. But also could be the case, again, if this is sunset, if I stop too early with giving water, then of course the substrate is getting dry, so therefore uptake during the night will also be a problem. So if I stop too early with giving water, that could also lead to blossom end rot. So if the amount of water I give is not high enough, or I stop too early, that will cause problems with blossom end rot. If my evaporation is too low, that could be a problem. But also in the summer it could be if the evaporation is too high. Because if the evaporation is too high during the day, it will take the water from the fruit, and because of the lack of the calcium, it will collapse. So in the winter, a low evaporation will cause a problem. In the spring or the summer, a high amount of evaporation will cause a problem. But in both cases, a high EC will make the problem worse. In strawberry, we also can have tip burn, so there's also the deficiency of calcium. If you look at the amount of ammonia, in Europe we determine everything in millimoles, not in ppms. But again, we see if we apply ammonium compared to ammonium, we see there's an increase of the amount of tip burn compared to the two with now tip burn ammonia. In the winter, you have about 1,000 joules per square centimeter. Should under normal circumstances, including the drain, I should give 3 liters of water per day per square meter. If a grower would only give, let's say, 2.5 liters, what would happen to the EC in the drain? That could be besides the effect that we said before. If I don't give enough water, I already have a bigger problem with calcium deficiency. But if the EC is also higher, that also will lead to more problems of calcium deficiency. So there's a direct effect of getting less water, but also because of the increase of EC, therefore the risk of having blossom end rot will be even double. So therefore a lot of growers who have a light sensor, and well, all the growers in Holland have a light sensor, they will just look at the end of the week. How much light did they have? And was that then according to 1,000 joules compared to 3 liters? So if they had 7,000 joules that week, that also means 7,000 divided by 1,000 multiplied to 3, that they should actually give 21 liters. if they find out that the amount was less, then they know they should give more water if it was too high. We also can have a problem of giving too much calcium. And that's what we call the gold spot in a tomato. So we have light spots on the tomato. Here on the paprika we can see the orange spots on the fruit. This is caused, what we said before, by too high levels of calcium, because the sun is shining on the fruit or the leaves, so the water is taking out of the fruit. The calcium concentration is even getting higher, and then because of the high levels of calcium, crystals will appear, and the needles of the crystal will puncture the cell, and therefore the cell will leak and become orange. So what I should do now is actually different compared to the other one.
And after this, take break.
Yeah, that's what I want to do. The gold spot was caused because too high levels of transpiration, so actually now I have to reduce the transpiration, so I can do that, but have a higher, make sure that the humidity is still high, chlorophyll, so that's also the reason that it gives a light green color when there's a deficiency. So that means this would be my normal tomato plant, and if you look at this one, this is light green. Normally it would be only at the top for the sulfate, but of course, again, if the plant was giving not enough sulfate already from a small stage, it will be the whole plant light green. So if I have a lack of nitrogen, of sulfate already from the beginning, then in both cases I will have a light green plant. So these were the major elements, but then we said we also have elements that are only needed in very small amount. Iron, manganese, copper, zinc, boron and molybdenum. The most important one is iron deficiency. The veins will normally be dark green and the tissue will be light green. However, sometimes with tomatoes also could be that only the beginning of the very young leaf is light yellow, almost white. But if you look at most of the cases, then at least in Holland, I don't know if in Korea, but most of the cases that if I see deficiency of iron, then it's not related with the amount of iron that I actually give, but it's more related that the pH is too high. If the pH is higher than 6 or 6.5, I will have a problem with the uptake of iron. If you look at paprika, paprika is more dark green, so maybe a paprika it only starts above 6.5 or something like that. But if you look at the growers in Korea, most of the growers are using EDTA. If you look at the substrate, because most of the growers are growing in the substrate, then we see if the pH is higher than 5.5, the uptake of EDTA is being reduced. It's not zero, but significantly being reduced. If you look at DTPA, then it's still uptake 100% till pH of 6. EDTA is not a problem till 7.5 or 8. However, most of the growers are using EDTA because it's cheaper. But if I look at drain samples, I quite often find pHs of 6 or 6.5. So that means if the pH of the drain is quite high, the uptake of the iron as I give as EDTA becomes a problem. But also the stability in light, it's shorter compared to DTPA or EDTA. So it's broken down more quickly by UV. Because of the poor uptake by a pH higher than 5.5, all the Dutch growers are using DTPA instead of EDTA. Well, this is what we saw yesterday, the deficiency of boron in paprika. Boron is needed for the growing tips, and growing tips can be changed into flowers or into the fruit. So a lack of boron could also lead to malformation of the flower, malformation of the fruit, but also needed for growing tips in the roots. So the root development is also depending on the boron. So what we see over here was the magnesium deficiency, but the magnesium deficiency is actually caused by the lack of boron. Because of the lack of boron, the development of the roots was reduced, and therefore the uptake of the other phytorealizers becomes a problem. We also could have too high levels of boron, and that actually could be the case in Korea because high levels of boron could already be present in the well water. If I have boron toxicity, will I see that in an old leaf or in a young leaf? If I have boron toxicity, will I see it in an old leaf or in a young leaf? If I give too much, then this was only, let's say, there for 5 days. So then it only had uptake in 5 days, too much boron. This one is already here, let's say 100 days. And since this one is 100 days, therefore the amount in this leaf will be much higher compared to that. Paprika, again, is the exception. With a lot of things, paprika is the exception, but with all the other ones, we said, if I would look at the leaf, then only the veins are still green. But if I look at paprika, well, I also can see some discoloration, but the main symptom for paprika is that I will see brown spots on my young leaf. And it looks very similar to iron, because also with iron it's a green vein, but light green vegetation. Only with manganese, the difference between the dark green and the light green is more clear. And usually with iron, it's usually the very young leaves, and usually with the manganese, it's just a little bit older. And just like with iron, if the pH is too high, I can have problem with the manganese, because the uptake of manganese is reduced when the pH is too high. What happens is that, what we said before, quite often in the beginning, the cocoa peat has a high pH, let's say 6.5. So then the manganese is blocked within the cocoa peat. During the cultivation, the pH could drop. If the pH is dropped, then the manganese is coming free from the cocoa peat, and then we could have too high levels of manganese. Now I can find some small brown spots on the stems, brown spots on the paprika leaves, or it could lead to iron deficiency, because the high levels of manganese reduce the uptake of iron. So now this leaf looks almost similar to the one of deficiency, but now it's not a deficiency, but now it's the deficiency of iron, but caused by too high levels of manganese. Zinc deficiency. Now the internets are getting small, the leaves are getting more elongated, and again the green veins are light green tissue. And production can be reduced from 10 to 20% of the crop. I never saw copper deficiency in practice, because the amount needed by the plant is very low. So, but technical speaking, you could have a deficiency, so you would see some curling and a blue-gray color of the leaves. In Holland, quite a lot of growers actually give more than the plants need for copper. And do they have any idea what's the reason for giving more copper than needed by the plant? The high levels of copper reduce the growth of Phytophthora and Pythium. So it works preventive of reducing the risk for root diseases. The normal standard would be about 24 grams. So then people are using 36 grams on 100,000 liters of water, assuming there's hardly any copper in your well water. Because if there is already copper in the well water, then of course we have to apply less. Molybdenum deficiency. Well, the symptoms are a little bit different. If you look at a lot of other crops, then the leaves are asymmetric. So this is the main vein, only this part looks normal and this part is not grown at all. But what I said, the amount needed by the plant is very low, so the only time I saw molybdenum deficiency was when the pH of the drain water was too low. All the ammonium that I give is quite easily uptaken by the plant. So if I would give twice as much, then the plant just uptakes twice as much. But before there was not a deficiency, because already the plant took enough. So therefore there's no need to increase more when you're already sure that you give this amount. Well, I just put it in because of the questions related that people asked on the farmer. So this is what we said about the tomaton. Also when they apply, the fruits could have a problem with the coloring, because also again because of the lack of the sugars, they just stay white instead of turning red. If you look at the cherry tomatoes, then in Holland we grow them just as one string. In Korea people would like to have 2 strings, and I can have 2 strings if I get a lower plant temperature. So by growing with a lower temperature, I can have more double stats instead of if the pollination is bad for the fruit, so it's not properly set, okay, that's probably what I mentioned in the winter, that could be too low, related to too low temperatures. But also if the temperature is higher than 30 degrees, then the quality of the pollen is less, and also we could have bad fruit setting. So if we don't have enough light compared to the temperature, that could be a problem. Too high plant temperatures could be a problem. Not giving enough water, too high humidity or too low humidity, all could lend to a poor quality of the flower. Too high humidity, because then the pollen sticks together. Too low humidity, and that's what will happen when the temperature is more than 30 degrees. The pollen doesn't stick to the pistil. King truss is that when the growth circumstances are poor in the beginning and stronger later. So then therefore the stem is weak, and then with the more light 1 week or 2 weeks earlier, the fruit weight is too high, and also it can kink. And that is also can do with if it's too dark days, we keep too high temperatures in the winter, so therefore the stem is getting very weak. If it's brighter 1 week earlier, then more sugars is going to the tomato is getting heavier, and then so this is what I want to show, because we mentioned all kind of deficiency, but this also are symptoms, but then symptoms not related with fertilizers, but symptoms related with climate. If we look at the fertilizers, they only not play a role for what the plant needs, but they also influence the pH. And what we mentioned before, the pH influences the uptake of iron, manganese, phosphate, and if it's too low, the level of molybdenum. If the pH is too low, my root tips will burn. And also when the pH in the drain water is low, then I'm more susceptible for root diseases like Pythium or Phytophthora. And as a result of this, the growth, the production is also depending on the pH. So if you look at the pH, then I would like to have a pH lower as 6, but higher as 5. Suppose I have a drip pH of 5.5. What's then the pH in the drain? It could be anywhere, let's say from 4 to 7. But what he said, I would like to see a pH in the drain between 5 and 6. So how can I control the pH of the drain? pH in the slab is here 7.4. Here it's only 5.5. And we see that the production over here is only 50% compared to the production at this side. The effect will be less with peppers, because peppers are more darker green leaves compared to rose, but still there will be quite some difference between a cultivation at a high pH compared to a lower pH. Do they know what pH actually stands for? Okay, what does then a pH of 4 means? pH of 4 means that the concentration of H plus is 10 to the minus 4. So this figure is over here. And then in millimole per liter. So what will happen if I have 1 liter of water with a pH of 4 and 1 liter with a pH of 5? If I mix that together, what's the pH of this one? 4 is a concentration of 10 to the minus 4, so that would be 0.0001. pH of 5 is 0.00001. If I would add them together, then it would be 0.000111, but now in 2 liters. So 1 liter concentration is now 0.00055. And that is the same as 10 to the minus 4.25. So the pH is 4.25. So that also means that if my pH is too low, I can increase the pH of my drip water, but what you see, there's a very small effect of getting a higher pH. Even if I go 4 to 5, then pH is still close to 4. So therefore changing the pH of the drip water is not working. Especially if you realize that the substrate is about 18 liters. It contains about 70% water. So 7 times 18, that would be roughly 13 liters. So even I change the amount of water, it's still low compared to the 13 liters that already is on 1 square meter. So also changing the amount of water has a very limited influence. Looking at the fertilizers is more smart. If I look at the roots, then the plant is uptaking negative charge elements like nitrate, sulfate and phosphate, and the other one positive charge elements like potassium, calcium and ammonia. But you can imagine that this amount is not exactly the same as this amount. But the plant cannot be electrical charge. So that means if the plant is uptaking more negative elements than positive elements, it has to compensate it by something. And that does it by releasing bicarbonate. And if I release the bicarbonate, the pH in the root zone will go up. But what he mentioned is that he said the pH in the drain depended on the growth stage. And that has to do, if there's a lot of tomato or paprika on your plant, or a lot of flowers, then the plant will uptake more potassium. So there, if you look at ammonia, ammonia plays a special role inside the plant. Because there were some people with drain water analysis. What was the figure of the ammonia in the drain water analysis? 0 or almost 0. And that has to do that the plant, if you look at nitrogen, it can either uptake as nitrate or as ammonia. But because this is positive charged, it's easier for the plant to uptake ammonia than nitrogen. And therefore, if I would look at the drain water, I would hardly see any ammonia left over. All the ammonia is already uptaken by the plant. That also would mean if I would increase the amount of ammonia, the plant would uptake more ammonia. But since the plant doesn't need to uptake more nitrogen, it will reduce the uptake of nitrate. So the uptake of plus goes up, the uptake of negative charge elements goes down. So the plant gets more positive charge and therefore releasing H+. So what I can do, if it's the pH is too high, I'm just going to add ammonia. If the pH is too low, I'm going to reduce the amount of ammonia. So now I've got a very effective tool to control the pH. If I want to control the pH, I can add 3 kilograms of ammonia on 100,000 liters. Or if I want to reduce it, I can take 3 kilograms less. Because what he said before, if the ammonia reduces the uptake of calcium. So if I would give more than 12 kilogram, then I could have the problem with the blossom antwort. However, if I look at the growers in the soil, then maybe in the winter they only maybe give water once a day, or once a week. And if I give only water once a week, the first day all the ammonia is already absorbed by the plant, so then the pH is reduced. But all the other days, all the ammonia is already gone, pH will go up. So what we could do in the soil is apply urea, because urea is this, but it's broken down by bacteria, and then I get ammonia. So because the bacteria are limited amount, so they cannot break down all the urea at once, so now I get a gradual amount of ammonia being released every day. Especially if you took into account that this is the effect in Holland, but the radiation is less. So the stronger the radiation level is, the stronger the impact of the EC will be. On the other hand, we also have positive effects of the EC, because this is what you see with the production. But if you look at the shell life, so if I pick my tomato and see how long it lasts, then we see that the shell life is increasing with the increasement of the EC. If we look at the dry matter, we see if the EC in the roots is around 2, the dry matter is about 5%. If the EC around the root zone is increasing, then we see also that the dry matter is increasing in the fruit. So the taste of the paprika or the tomato is increased by having a higher EC. Some cherry tomato growers in Holland are even having an EC about 8 or 10, because they're grown for the Russian market, where the price for the cherry tomatoes is extremely high. On the other hand, if we increase the EC, then it's what we see also here. We have an increasement of the blossom antwort, because the calcium uptake was reduced by the high EC. Paprika we already mentioned, cucumber it's the same. So in general, too high EC, plants get more generative, shorter, dark leaves, lower production but a better taste and a better shelf life. But we also can use the EC of the drain to check if we give the right amount of water. If the difference between the drip EC and the drain EC is small, if that is, let's say, less than 1 difference, then we know that we give a lot of water. If it's more, let's say, than 1.5, then we know that we give not enough water. So a small difference is an indication that we give too much water, a big difference. If the EC is too low, then it's very likely we will have a deficiency. So what we mentioned before. If you look at the equipment, then most growers will have an A and B tank. Well, for the soil growers, it's enough to have 1 tank because the soil works as a bigger buffer. So one day I can use the A tank as an A tank, and next week I could use the same tank but then filled with the B solution. Working with the A and B tank is relatively cheap and relatively simple. In the A tank I only put in calcium, nitrogen, potassium and iron, but no phosphate or sulfate. Especially the calcium will participate with the phosphate and the sulfate. So then I would have blockage of my system. But what most growers don't realize, that also the pH of their tank is important. If they are only using EDTA, then the range is between 2 and 5. And that has to do that if the pH is higher than 5, I will again have precipitation because of the strong concentration of the fertilizers. If the pH is lower than 2, the chelate of the iron will be broken down. Most of the time, most of the growers I saw in Korea, they did it correctly. Also the tank should be covered at the top. And what you see quite often in Holland is that the tank is open, but then the sunlight can get into the tank and break down the chelate as well. But also algae and fungi can grow into water because then we would have light, fertilizers and water, so the growth of microorganisms can be stimulated. But also I would like that the tank is empty within 7 days, because the longer the water is standing in the tank, the more microorganisms can grow in the water, causing problems with clogging, but also the light can break down the chelate, so therefore I would like to have it empty within 7 days. But another reason is if I see that the pH of my drain water is too low, I cannot take the ammonia out of it because it's already in it. But if I change it, then I can say I'm going to reduce the amount of ammonia in it. If you look at the B tank, then it contains magnesium, nitrogen, potassium, phosphate, sulfate and all the minor elements except for iron. And now it's only important that pH is below 5, because in the B tank there's no chelate because the iron is in the other one. So therefore how low the pH is not important. It should be below 5. It's also important that if you look at the A and B tank, that the level is the same. The days before there was more water coming out of the A tank, so then it means the plants were receiving more calcium but less magnesium. But if this tank is empty, then it's the other way around. Then it's only getting water from the B solution. So the fertilizers are not, if you look at the fertilizers, they are not put in the order is there for a reason, because these are the ones that should be put in first. So first I fill the tank halfway with water, then I start from the top, go to the bottom, because now the alkalic fertilizers, if they are there, they're halfway, because first I should put in the acid one, then the alkalic one, and then the neutral one. So if I follow this order, that is representative to the order of acid one, alkalic one, neutral one. The reason is the alkalic one, because the alkalic one is causing a high pH, and high pH is causing more problems with precipitation. So if I would start with the alkalic one, and then do the neutral ones or the acid ones, then the pH is still high, and therefore causing precipitation. If I start with the acid one, then the pH is already extremely low. If I put then the alkalic one, at the place where the alkalic is coming into the water, pH is already low, so the pH will not be that high anymore, because the level is already pretty low. Also the minor elements, they're also usually quite difficult to dissolve. So what some growers do is that they first dissolve the minor elements in a bucket of water, and then the water of the bucket is going to the B tank. And if the water in the bucket is a little bit warmer, so let's say 20-30 degrees, so then the dissolvability of the minor elements is even easier. Availability of warm water inside the greenhouse. So then it's easier to bring down the pH with just adding a little bit of acid. That will probably work more easier for most of the farmers than getting a temperature of 70 degrees. Just like a car that we're driving, also a car goes regularly to the garage to check certain things. It's the same with our watering system. We have to check it regular. If we look at the pH sensor, it's a glass bulb at the end, but it should be clean, because if I have algae or microorganism, then because the pH is measured by measuring the difference in the voltage between inside and outside. But if it's covered with algae, it cannot measure correctly. So then the pH that I'm reading is not correct. And the pH of the drip water is quite important, because if it's lower than 5.2, there could be a risk of damaging my roots. If it's higher than 5.2, there's a big risk of precipitation, so a risk of clogging. If you look at the tomato and paprika growth, quite a lot of them are using a pH of 5.2. And that is to do with, they're a little bit afraid of using ammonia, because of the ammonia reduces the uptake of calcium. So therefore they want to try to reduce the amount of ammonia as much as possible. So they want to control the pH, but already starting as low as possible. I have a drip EC at my computer, and it says 5.5. Now I go to the end of my dripper, collect the water. Then it could be the case that I actually can see it's 6.5. And I think it will be in most cases the place here in Korea, because the carbonate is slight alkalic. So what it does is
Slight alkali means
not a strong alkalic.
alkali, yeah.
Yeah. So what it does, it will uptake the H plus that is in the drip water. But if it uptakes the H plus, then it means there's less H plus in the drip water, so therefore the pH goes up. So high levels of bicarbonate will cause a higher pH of the drip water than is actually sent away by the unit. We said if the pH is higher than 5.8, we have a risk of blockage. So this is an indication that I am having a severe risk for blockage in my system. So what I could do as a grower then, instead of having a drip pH of 5.5, I could go to 5.2 and check, maybe it's now 6. So okay, the risk is a little bit lower, but still the risk is there. But if I would go, let's say, to pH of 4.5, that could maybe lead to pH of 5.5 during the night. But in the summer, maybe the distance of the time between two drip cycles is maybe only 20 minutes. And since bicarbonate is only a slight alkalic, it takes about 2-3 hours to react with the H+. So if I would drip 4.5 in the summer, then still it would come out maybe 4.8. So therefore 4.5 only of a low pH will only work when the pH coming out of it, it's not lower than 5.2. And I can check that the best during the day in the summer. So if I cannot drop my pH any lower because of the risk of burning during the day, I have to think of a more expensive solution. And that would be a day storage tank. So if let's say because of the radiation, let's say I will use tomorrow 6 liters of water. If I have 1 hectare, so 6 times 10,000, so I will need 60,000 liters of water. So already at the end of the day I can start with filling my tank with 60 cubic meters of water. If I know it's 60 cubic meters, then I also know how much liter of acid I have to put in to bring down the pH already to, let's say, 5.5. If I start using that tomorrow, then all the acid already has plenty of time to react with the bicarbonate. The same we can do, check the EC of the drip water, because we have an EC sensor at the unit, but maybe because it's getting older or something, maybe it's not accurate anymore, so it also could be a difference between the actual EC and the measured EC. So therefore we also need to check. And to see if we have a blockage, we can take a few drippers, put them in bottles of water and see if each bottle is having the same amount of water. So that's the easiest way to check if you have a problem with the blockage before you have a serious problem. Also, we should check the filter, because if the filter is getting dirty, then the precipitation caused by the high pH or algae or whatsoever, but if the filter is already dirty, then the filter will not able to take it out anymore. So the filter should be clean, and we can see that if the pressure is too high, then it's an indication that the filter is dirty. Some growers also have a pressure sensor at each valve in the greenhouse, and the pressure depends on the opening of the valve. So, but if the pressure is different compared to another valve, that means also the amount of water coming out of this valve is different compared to the other one. So the valve, the pressure of all the valves should be the same. Well, I mentioned already some part of the clogging, but if we look in general at the clogging, we can distinguish two causes for it. One is caused by organic material, so pollution of fungi, bacteria, these are the main one. And the other one is the inorganic, what we said, the precipitation of salts. Just like the plants, also the bacteria and the fungi and the algae are using the ammonia. So if I would look again at the pH of the drip water, so again it's sent by 5.5 away, but if I look at the first drip cycle in the morning, and let's say the pH is 5, then this is also an indication that I have organic pollution, because of the ammonia that's been uptaken by the bacteria and the fungi, the pH will drop. So a low pH is also an indication of organic pollution. What we can do during the cultivation is use peroxide. Peroxide is H2O, but this is very stable because the normal way is H2O. So this is a very reactive chemical. So that means if this is getting into the tube, it will kill all the bacteria, the fungus and the virus that are inside the tube. But it also will mean if the tube would be very clean, there's nothing to react with it, then it comes out of the drippers and then it would react with the root tips. So we have to be careful not to apply too much. Grown in soil, it's not a problem because the soil is so big and the roots are, what we said, 30 centimeters deep, then the damage is very limited. But especially with a young planting, because then the roots are very small, the risk is high. And if I would root, then there's some papers I can use to check how much coming out of it, and the amount should be not more than 5 ppm. The easiest way is doing it at the end of the cultivation. Because if I look at my mixing tank, I can put in bleach and use the bleach for disinfecting the system. I only need 3 liters of bleach of 100 liters of water and keep it in the system for 12 hours. If I would do it during the cultivation, then the bleach would come out of it and also ruin the roots of my plant. So therefore I can only do it at the end of the cultivation. If I have inorganic pollution, so that was caused by the precipitation, then it could be caused by too high pH. So the pH in the A and B tank could be too high, the pH of the drip water could be too high, or the amount of phosphate, what we explained yesterday, could be too high. The iron will react with the oxygen and causing rust particles, FeTO3, and causing precipitation, because rust doesn't dissolve. Okay, if this reacts, then we could filter it. But if we want to avoid this one, we can create a fountain. And if you have a fountain, there's enough surface for the iron to react with the oxygen. So now the iron already will react with the oxygen and precipitate at the bottom of the reservoir. Well, most growers are using rainwater. Okay. But I also knew some growers who use well water and they created a fountain like this. Okay, this is what we mentioned before. The pH should not be too high. What we said at the end of the cultivation with the other one, we could use bleach. Here we can use nitric acid. This will create a pH that's just a little bit above 2, depending on the amount of bicarbonate. But then it's important that if you look at the mixing tank, we got our pH sensor, that we take the pH sensor out of it. Because otherwise the H+ will go into the sensor and have a negative effect on the sensor. The filter should also not be having too big openings, because if the openings are bigger, then of course also bigger particles go on. So for substrate, not for the soil, it should be between 80, maximum 100 micrometers. A lot of growers in Korea don't use drippers, but they have a drip line. But if this is the opening of the drip line, if I would put it downwards, there's a bigger chance that the roots will grow away inside. So then the roots can cause the blocking. If I put it upwards and it's not covered by the plastic, then the roots will not grow inside. If we look at potassium phosphate or phosphate acid, it's not really a fertilizer, but we can apply it as a way of crop protection.
Against the disease?
Yeah, but also to stimulate root growth. But this is a tree, and normally if we talk about phosphate, we're talking about phosphate, but then it's PO4. So this is not actually used as a fertilizer, but it's more it's making the plant stronger and therefore less susceptible for Phytophthora and Pythium. But what it said, it also stimulates the development of the root growth. So if I'm coming from a winter and going into spring, then the plant has grown during the winter, so it's becoming bigger and bigger. But in the winter, the evaporation is not that high compared to the spring. So the plant is not making very many roots. So therefore, 1 month before I'm going into the period with higher radiation levels, I can start with giving the phosphate to stimulate the root growth. So therefore the problem of wilting in the spring will be less. I only have to apply 5 liters per hectare, but I just can put it in my bee tank. But it's best.
Liquid type?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can also, well, if it's liquid, then it's about the same weight, but I can check it up later to be sure. What I do in Holland is just do it twice. Just 1 month before the radiation is high and one just before the radiation is really high. So I start, let's say your radiation level is already high in March, then you could start end January, the first one, and half February, or well, the third week of February, no, the second one. You also could apply in the summer, because if what you said before, if the temperature of the water is very high, the risk of Pythium is quite high. So then I could use as a preventive measurement, control. If I know that the temperature is going to be very high, with a high temperature also the plant is going to be more vulnerable, so then I could use it preventive every month. If I use it when the a bee tank is almost empty, then I know it's going to be strongly concentrated. If I put it in the bee tank when it's still full, I still have 5 liters, but then it's quite strong diluted. So it's more effective if it's...
for the 1 day left.
Yeah, well, maybe even better only for half a day left. There were also some questions about pest and disease control. This is a little bit difficult because the chemicals that could be used in Korea could be completely different compared to Holland. So I did prepare something, but well, it's not about all the chemicals because I don't know them in Korea. Okay. If you look at crop protection, we have to look, if you have to keep the plant healthy, then it's less susceptible for diseases. The crop handling is an impact on how easy we can get problems, the climate, but also the application of the chemical. If you look at how I keep the plant healthy, it has to do with plant density, because the lower the amount of plants per square meter, the stronger each individual plant is. Of course, if the plant density is too low, then maybe I have a problem with my production. But if we just look at the health care of the plant, the lower the plant density, the better. Tomato and paprika is even better to look at stem density, because I could have 2 plants. But if I have 2 plants with 2 stems or 2 plants with 3 stems, then of course that makes a big difference. The older the plant gets, the more vulnerable it gets. But everyone is growing only a crop that only lasts for 1 month, for 1 year. So what you mentioned before, if I give too much water, the crop gets more sensitive. If the EC is too low, the crop gets more sensitive. And if I look at nutrition, then low amount of calcium is a problem. Too high levels of nitrogen can be a problem. And high levels of sulfate also make the plant less susceptible for diseases. High levels of calcium and sulfate makes the plant less susceptible. And of course, some varieties can be more susceptible for mildew or botrytis than other ones. For crop handling, then removing leaves is important, because if I look at tomato, if I got a lot of leaves, then the air movement is reduced, so it could have a higher humidity, and also the leaves are evaporating. So with removing the leaves, I get a better climate at the bottom of the plant. The way I remove the plants is also important, because if I leave a big part left over, then this dries up not so quickly. So I should cut it close to the stem to make sure drying up is easy. If my knife is not sharp, then maybe the wound is more like this. If I have a sharp wound, then it's like this. And again here, the surface is smaller, so this one dries up quicker than this one, so this one is more susceptible for stem botrytis. If I would do it late in the day, then maybe 1 hour later there's already sunset, so also then the drying up of the wound is a problem. So I should do it early enough. Especially tomatoes quite sensitive for stem botrytis, so sometimes even the grower puts some paste with chalk on it to make sure that the wound is closed. Also, if this is still the leaf, there are two ways of cutting. I could cut it upwards, or I could cut it downwards. So if you look at labor efficiency, then this is quicker, better. But if you look at for the plant, this is better, because if I do it like this, downwards, by cutting and pulling at the leaf at the same time, the last bit can be torn down, so it could have a bigger wound. If I take it upwards, because the leaf is connected like this, there's a smaller part left behind. If we look at the climate, this is a little bit also what we already discussed this morning, but they're more related with the cracks. But the cracks were related with condensation on the fruit. If I have condensation, then also I have a bigger risk for fungi disease. The problem is it's difficult to avoid high temperatures. But with high temperatures, what we mentioned before, the crop is weakened. And when the crop is weak, it's more sensitive. But the only thing I can do to reduce the temperature is maybe using with a screen or whitewash on top of my roof, but it's difficult to control the temperature when it's outside 35 degrees or warmer. What we mentioned before, that is not that difficult. Reducing the draft by closing the door every time someone goes in the greenhouse or outside the greenhouse, it's already reducing the infection level of the mildew. But if I keep a door open like there, then I get more draft than when it's closed. So closing the door every time people go inside the greenhouse or outside the greenhouse is important. The heating system is important, because it should take care that the temperature is uniform inside the greenhouse. Because if this is my greenhouse, well, the biggest difference I saw in Holland was that it was 4 or 5 degrees. So let's say if it's 20 degrees over here, then it could be 15 degrees at the side because of the cooling down. Suppose temperature is here 20 degrees, humidity is 80%. What's the humidity over here? It's not 100% correct, but it's almost correct. 20 degrees will mean that roughly the air can contain 20 grams of water per cubic meter. So then it's saturated. So this is 100%. We said we only had 80%. 80% from 20 grams is 16 grams. If you look at 15 grams, because if you're talking about the range by 15 to about 25, you could roughly say for every gram, every degree, there can be 1 gram in the air. So that's why you could roughly say 20 degrees is 20 grams, 15 degrees is roughly 15 grams. So, but if we calculated here that there was 16 grams of water in the air, then it was said was correct. There's humidity here will be 100% and I will have condensation. So therefore a uniform temperature is important, otherwise I have problems with condensation and therefore problems with diseases. If I want to spray, then it's better if I spray against insects is to spray at the end of the day, because a lot of the insects are more active when it's warm. So at the end of the day, it's the highest temperature in your greenhouse, but also a lot of insecticides against the aphids or the whitefly are broken down by the UV. So therefore there's another reason to better do it at the end of the day. If you look at trips, in the morning they're still not active, they're still waiting for warming up, so they're still hiding away, especially because they're small. They can get into really small parts of the plant. So if you would spray, the chemical is not getting on the trips. If it's 12 o'clock, then it's already too warm for them, then they hide away, so they're most active. Yeah. If I've got systemical chemicals, especially got the chemicals against mite, they're partially systemic, and that means I spray on top of the leaf, but the mites are always at the bottom. But the systemical or partially systemical means it can be translated through the leaf, but therefore the leaf has to uptake the chemical. If it's dried up within 20 minutes, I saw sometimes with growers, because of the low humidity, there's no time for the leaf to uptake the chemicals. So therefore, with systemical chemicals, they should be at least wet for 2 hours. Sometimes growers are also using a fogging device or LVM. For a lot of chemicals, then the amount that is, the concentration that's used per 100 liter is the same that the amount for the fogging installation, but then per 1,000 square meter. So the concentration that's applied, let's say a concentration of 2 liters on 100 liter, then if I would use a fogging device, then it would be 2 liters on 1,000 liter. But I not use the fogging installation for mites, because for mites the contact is quite important, so the amount that I put into the surface is not high enough. This is good for whitefly, lice, maybe mildew, especially for mildew, because I can spread it around and don't use as much of water, and because mildew likes water, so I can spray, but it also makes it worse. If I look at my crop, there's an easy way to tell if it's spray damage or some kind of deficiency. If I look at the plant, which part of which leaf is most sensitive? Yeah, so this leaf, let's say this leaf. This is very small, it's still closed, so then there's hardly chemical on it. There's no cuticle on it or very small layer, so this one is quite sensitive. So if I would come back, let's say 2 weeks later, then I look at the leaves, then this all in the greenhouse, all the layers are about the same level. I can find 1, maybe 2 leaves that are having a problem. All the one on the bottom, they're clean. All the one on top are clean because they didn't receive it, and these were already too strong. So if I can see at the same height during the whole greenhouse the problem just with 1 or 2 leaves, then I know it's chemical application of the spraying. And it could be because what he said, the concentration is too high, or it could be that the temperature is too high, or this is more or less also related with the radiation. Because if the temperature is too high, then maybe I'm spraying, let's say, with a concentration of 2 liters on 100 liter. But what I mentioned just before, maybe already within 20 minutes, most of the water is evaporated. So if all the water is evaporated, then the plant is still not uptaking the fertilizer. So instead of 2 liters of 100 liter, now it's 2 liters on 10 liters, because all the water evaporated, and therefore the concentration on the leaf is increased and therefore causing spray damage. A third reason could be a combination. So that means I use one chemical against aphids and another one against mildew. And the one, especially for mildew, you could say almost for 100% you cannot combine them with another chemical. Temperature is too high, the evaporation is low. Also, if I store the chemicals in the greenhouse, then it could be they're already warmed up by the sun, so they're also less more chance for spray damage. And also what some growers in Holland made a mistake is that today they use the spraying tank for killing weeds, then they killed the tank and then use it for spraying against aphids. But the chemicals against the weeds are usually hormonal based, and that means that you only need a very, very small amount. So even if you clean the tank 3 times, the amount of residue is still enough to harm your paprika plants. So you should have a special sprayer for your weeds and another one for using on the plants. If we look at thrips, thrips is maybe not so big problem for the paprika and tomato growers, although sometimes there can be a heavy infection on the flower, but since we're not selling the flowers, but the main problem for the thrips will be they can transmit viruses. And I control the thrips by spraying a chemical, but if I add sugars to it, the sweetness attracts more thrips, and therefore it's more effective in killing. The thrips like the smell of sugars, but they don't like the smell of garlic. So what also some growers do, in a mixing tank, they put a net with squashed garlic, and then because of the smell, the thrips becomes more active. So that means if I will spray tomorrow or the day after it, and I put it now in a mixing tank, they will be more active tomorrow, so the effect of the spraying is better. If I don't spray, then only the thrips will be more active, so they will move more from one place to another. Okay. So then the problem gets worse. So the garlic is only effective when I combine it with a spraying. If I only do it, then the thrips becomes more active, but my problem also. If you look at the powdery mildew, we said before, yesterday, that draft plays an important role by mildew. So that means if I look at the ventilation, I should try to use the lee side as much as possible, only when it's getting too warm, only the wind side. If I look at the bottom, then we would see the hairs, or if I look at the tomato or the lilia chrysanthemum, I would see the hairs on top of the leaf. If they are alive, then the hairs are standing up straight. If I use a chemical and they're dead, then they're flat and curled up. Sulfate pots is a cheap and effective way of controlling. So in Holland, and also in Australia, so therefore maybe also in Korea, is that a lot of growers had problems with mildew, especially in the summer. And that was caused that in the summer they said, well, it's too warm at night, so they opened the windows. But if my sulfate pot is hanging here and the window is open, then all the sulfate goes outside. Even for the growers without the sulfate pot, this could have a positive effect on the mildew, because but they said if I open them both, then I would have more draft and be more susceptible for mildew. So even if I don't use sulfate pots, this could be better compared to